I'm Charlie Sykes. I hope you're enjoying this taste of spring weather. It won't last. Sunday Insight starts right now. Good morning and welcome to Sunday Insight. In the week that was a stunning Packer comeback in Detroit. I just can't watch this one enough.
Rodgers in trouble. It's going to get there. He turned 32 yesterday. Does he have a vintage moment in him? In the end zone, it is caught for the win.
That is just good. And also this week, Mayor Tom Barrett announces he wants a fourth term in office. Speaker Paul Ryan lays out a Republican agenda. The Pentagon greenlights women in combat. And the state Supreme Court says the John Doe probe into state conservatives is still dead. But we start with yet another massacre and another debate about guns and terrorism. This was the scene in San Bernardino. 2 gunmen kill 14 and injure 21 in a commando-style assault on a holiday party for co-workers. The shooting may seem familiar, but this one came with a chilling twist. There have been very few incidents with multiple gunmen, much less massacres involving a 27-year-old woman who had dropped off her 6-month-old baby with her grandma before the killing spree. The couple had thousands of rounds of ammunition and homemade bombs, and there were ties to radical Islam. Siad Farouk reportedly was radicalized, perhaps in touch with jihadists in the Middle East. His wife, Tashfeen Malik, who was also killed in the shootout with police, had reportedly been vetted by Homeland Security, which saw no red flags. Joining me on our panel this morning, Mikel Holt with the Milwaukee Community Journal, former State Representative Michelle Litjens, political strategist Lynne DeBruin, and Collin Roth, the managing editor of rightwisconsin.com. At what point is the president going to say this is not about gun control, it is about Islamic terrorism come to the homeland? Mikel Holt?
Well, he has to bring in guns, because we're talking about assault rifles and all this ammunition, etc., bombs and all of this. You know, you can't stop it. You know, interesting, I heard a ad en route to the station here from Cruz talking about how he had protected people's rights to bear arms and stuff. But do you need assault weapons?
Okay,
I mean,
but
do you need these?
See, I understand that the Democrats want to talk about gun control when we are actually dealing with a major development in the war on terror. This was ISIS-inspired. The wife in the case pledged allegiance to ISIS. You know, the whole idea, this would be like George W. Bush saying we need to have some sort of box cutter control. What is the reluctance on the part of this country to acknowledge the nature of this global war of terror against Americans?
Actually, the country wants to acknowledge terrorism. They know what this is. They're calling a spade a spade. It's the president and the media who says, no, Islam is a faith of love, and we know, Americans know this is not right.
Well, I mean, you know, not all Muslims,
but Hillary,
obviously.
But Hillary is out there trying to say that Islam is a faith, is a religion of love.
Well, I think you can make a distinction between moderate Islam and radical Islam. What you can't get is the president who refuses to use the term even radical Islam.
But that's why he won't do it, though.
Well, it doesn't fit the script, right?
No.
The war on terror was something from the Bush years. President Obama was going to get us out of the Middle East, and all of these problems were going to magically go away. And what we've seen is the rise of ISIS and this vacuum that we created in the Middle East.
But this is the worst nightmare. I mean, this is something that people have talked about for some time. What would happen if we have homegrown terrorists in the sense the people who lived among us, who were radicalized using the social media? And the fact that nobody picked up on anything, the fact that you would be able to assemble, you know, an armory like this to kill this many people. I mean, we're in a new era of the war on terror. This is a scary time, isn't it?
Well, it is. And the part I disagree with what some of you folks have said is that I do think that Democrats acknowledge that this is a war on terror. I think the president has gone kind of off to skewed to one side, trying to prevent attacks on Muslims and trying to make a clear difference. So he's failing to recognize that there is
even before the bodies were
Islam.
removed. He tried to politicize this and make this about a gun control agenda.
Well, I think that, you know, people are pressing him for answers on what to do, and that's one of the options. One of the things I do think that we do need to deal with, these massive clips that can be sold and assault weapons, but that's not the only answer. The other answer is better identifying these folks, and what's scary here is they had no criminal record, no documented mental health history, and initially the federal government had only found very tenuous ties,
Do you guys
and so
understand
they weren't on a watch list.
Because I remember we were talking about the whole issue of the refugees. And when you had, some Republicans were saying, let's have a pause to make sure that we actually know what we're doing with the vetting of these refugees. And it was, oh, no, we can't do it. You're somehow a xenophobe or...
And I think that idea right now is temporarily off the table.
Right.
I haven't heard that.
We need to make a distinction, between Islam and terrorism.
Right.
Islam, it's not the reason why these people are killing other people.
Well, yes, it is.
Well, you're saying
but you can't
version of their faith.
But what I'm saying is, you have far-right Christians. The guy who walked into Planned Parenthood
who was a nut.
Right. Well, so you say he's a nut, but you don't identify him with Christianity.
Just to add one thing, you had mentioned that we didn't know what these people were doing. Do you remember the report that the neighbors actually saw them coming in and unloading these things?
Right.
They thought that it was abnormal behavior, but they didn't want to report it because they didn't want to be seen as racist somehow, because these were Middle Eastern men unloading boxes from trucks. So we did have an idea that this was going on, but because we've kind of been pressured not to say anything because we don't want to pigeonhole people, they didn't do anything.
Do you know how old I am? I actually remember when, if there was a major terrorist attack against this country by Islamic terrorists, that Americans would unite, that there would be the sense of shared experience. This was before we would have these massive Twitter attacks mocking fellow Americans for wanting to pray for the victims and for their families. I mean, something has changed in all of this, and it is this instant desire to politicize every single episode to score partisan points, as opposed to confronting the reality. And that's what's frightening, because I just sense that the administration is locked into their political narrative that we've won the war on terror, that this is not a significant issue, at least domestically.
Yeah, let's recall that President Obama said ISIS was contained the day of the Paris attacks, right before. Unfortunate timing for him. And this time, a week ago, he said that there was no threat inside the United States.
Yeah, okay. What has your glass half full? What has your glass half empty this week? Let's go around the table. Michael Holt, you're first.
Well, my glass is half full because Chicago Mayor Rahm Emanuel fired the chief of police for his role in a cover-up of a murdered black teenager last year. My glass is half empty because the mayor was equally complicit in that cover-up and should have fired himself.
Michelle Litjens.
My glass is half empty because of the violence we've seen in California and on the streets in Chicago and Milwaukee, but it's half full because violent crime, burglaries, and rape has decreased across the country to 1970 levels.
Lynne DeBruin.
Well, my glass is half full because Mark Zuckerberg and Priscilla Chan are giving away 99% of their fortune to charity. My glass is half empty because by 2016, the richest 1% of people in the world will be wealthier than all the rest of us combined.
Collin Roth.
My glass is half full because Paul Ryan articulated a bold, positive vision and agenda for Republicans in Congress last week. It's half empty because all of that can be erased to the ground if Donald Trump is the Republican nominee.
Well, my glass is half full because Americans do seem to be waking up to the real dangers of the global war of terrorists. It is half empty because the president seems to be in denial, unwilling to abandon or deviate from his political narrative and his ideologically rigid worldview. Coming up on Sunday Inside, just let it rest. The John Doe investigation shut down again. Who is now on the defensive after the latest Supreme Court ruling? The John Doe is still dead, and the special prosecutor fired. The state Supreme Court last week refused to reopen the probe, which it killed back in July when it ruled that prosecutors had abused their powers and violated the constitutional rights of the conservative groups they had targeted for allegedly coordinating with Scott Walker's recall campaign. The court also said that the probe's figurehead prosecutor, Fran Schmitz, had been improperly appointed. That led Schmitz to issue a rather remarkable statement. The miscalculation I made in this investigation was underestimating the power and influence special interest groups have in Wisconsin politics, he said. My career in the military and as a federal prosecutor fighting violent criminals and terrorists did not fully prepare me for the tactics employed by these special interest groups. So Collin Roth, I mean, wow, he's actually comparing political activists who engage in political speech to violent criminals and terrorists?
This was a written statement. It was very deliberate, casual smear of the targets here. And I don't really understand it other than it lets the mask slip on how deeply invested personally he was in this investigation. The fact that targets of this investigation were using completely legal means to fight this in the court of law. I don't understand how that is something that is unprecedented in any way.
I mean, he says my only miscalculation, his miscalculation was not understanding what the law was, what the Constitution, what free speech rights were. But interesting that he would lash out in that particular way. In case you were wondering, you know, is there a little bit of political bias? Had they become a little personally invested, a little bit of animus for the people that he was targeting? Not the kind of language you want to hear from prosecutors, is it?
No, it was actually a pretty candid moment that really even took me by surprise. You know, I agree with him that Gableman and Prosser should have recused themselves from this. But other than that, and I know that that's why he might be trying to appeal to the U.S. Supreme Court. Good luck on that one. The rest of this, it's over and done with. And this amount of animus really shone kind of a pretty nasty light on his motives.
Well, you know, and again, you know, as Lynn suggests, prosecutors are known to, when they lose in a court, to drop the case, to dismiss the charges. There is something obviously kind of personally obsessive about these prosecutors.
Well, he believes that he's right. Obviously, the court doesn't know what they're talking about, and he wants to continue to pursue this. And we know, I mean, the court told him now he has to turn over all of the seized documents to them. And I'm a little bit nervous if it's going to take a while for the U.S. Supreme Court to say that they're not going to take up this case. What are they going to do with those documents in the meantime? And are they going to try to further drag these other people through the mud in the public's eye until they finally told no?
Michael Holt.
Because this is not softball. This is hardball. You know, people are entrenched on both sides. I agree with Lynn. You know, but you know, he's gone through a conservative court. If he goes to the Supreme Court, there's another conservative court. You know, I'm a little bit leery only because, you know, you raised the possibility that you could be subpoenaed in your record. You might have emailed me, which means I could then be subpoenaed. Well, I don't want anybody seeing what's on my computer.
You know, I wrote a piece about that. I mean, at one point, according to their notes, they actually talked about subpoenaing and issuing search warrants to me and to Sean Hannity. Now, what do? We engage in political speech. So, you know, for a lot of the defenders of the John Doe investigation had been saying that, well, no, this is about campaign finance violations. What, again, you know, the pre-dawn paramilitary raids, the millions of documents, a little bit of overkill. But I think that was an interesting tell because it indicated that they had gotten so deep into the weeds on this that they were going after conservative commentators, conservative media. And I don't know whether they have some of my emails. You know, fine, I'm not really worried about anything, but we're going to find out whether they did. But I do think that Franz Schmidt's issuing that statement where he basically says, you people are, you know, use tactics that were worse than violent criminals and terrorists, really is one of those, you know, maybe unintentionally revealing moments where he's basically saying, yeah, I hate you folks so much that, you know, this is why I treat you this way. This is why we engage in this kind of overkill. When you have prosecutors have this power of basically of life and death, the ability to go into your house and seize all of your stuff, you kind of hope that they're a little bit more restrained, right? I mean,
a little more neutral.
No, well, yeah.
A little bit more sensitive to the rights and to the state of the law. Now, you may not want to hear it, but we'll tell you anyway. Let's hand out some unsolicited advice. Michael Holt, you're first.
Well, mine is to the 250,000 people who purchased guns in the aftermath of the San Bernardino killings. Look, there's a greater possibility that you'll shoot yourself to confront a terrorist. You better think about that.
Michelle Litjens.
To the President Obama and Defense Secretary Ashton Carter, read your military's own studies before you allow women in all combat positions. Women could not perform in all positions, so they are more likely to get injured. The military is not a social experiment.
Lynne DeBruin.
After each mass shooting, Congress holds a moment of silence for the victims, but does little to enforce the enforcement of current gun laws or enact new ones targeted at mass shootings. If Congress really cared about the victims, they'd take bipartisan action.
Collin Roth.
Here's my advice. It's for all sides, everyone, to learn to wait for details during big breaking news events. The impulse to spout off in service of an agenda is ugly and completely unnecessary.
Yeah, amen. Well, to liberal commentators and politicians, it is really not a good idea to mock people who say that their thoughts and prayers are with the victims of a horrible tragedy. Your smug disdain for people of faith just emphasizes how out of touch you are with average middle Americans. Still ahead on Sunday Insight, thousands of people losing their food stamps because of new reforms, but who do they really apply to, and is it really a problem? Food Food stamp reform was in the news last week. Newspaper headlines touted the story that 15,000 people had lost their food stamp benefits here as a result of reforms. Those reforms apply to single, childless, able-bodied adults and require them to either get a job, look for a job, or participate in job training. If they do one of those three things, they get to keep the benefit. If they don't, they lose them. So is this a problem, Lynne DeBruin?
Oh, philosophically, it's not a problem at all, and I don't have a problem that it's in the law. I think that it's going to cause a problem. There's a small subset, and I mean a small subset of that group of people who have moderate mental illness and have not been reclassified. No, they're not classified as excluded. The ones with significant and serious mental illness do. So I think that there's a subset that I have some sympathy for, and I wish there'd be a way to carve those folks out. But the rest of these folks, as it was clear in the law, had an opportunity to come in compliance. They could have and they didn't. The problem it's going to cause is that the vast majority of these people are in Milwaukee County, and there's going to be some 15,000 people statewide who no longer have that easy access to
But what
food.
you don't hear about is like there were 4,500 people who actually had moved from dependence to independence had actually gotten jobs. So, I mean, really, you know, is this a reform that most Wisconsinites would object to?
This is a reform Wisconsinites have been asking for. It's one of the reasons that they sent Republicans to Madison. They said, fix this. You know, we want to help people who need help, but not the people who are unwilling to help themselves. This only affected able-bodied adults who did not have children. All you had to be doing is looking for a job. If you were looking for a job, you wouldn't have lost your food stamps. So this is a good thing. This is putting more people in the workforce. This is creating more independence.
Collin Roth.
I agree. This is a fairly small subset of the entire food stamp program. I think there's something like over 770,000 people on food stamps in Wisconsin. About 60,000 fell into this single able-bodied adults without dependent children.
See, now you played Scrooge in the play,
I
right?
did.
That explains
that
it
was
all.
a play.
Were you in the play, Michelle? Mrs. Scrooge? You know, it seems to be just so mean-spirited. I understand.
So you have an
philosophically.
It's mean-spirited. In order to get it kicked off, I don't want to work. I won't look for a job. I won't get job training. And it's mean-spirited to not get the food stamps.
It appears to be
Yeah.
mean-spirited. You know, I mean, they didn't. I don't think the Republicans did this for any righteous reason. You know,
how about getting people off dependency?
No, well, I'm just saying, but there are people. It's not that. Well, some of these people are going to turn to crime, and so it's going to create another form of dependency.
But that's the philosophy, Mike. I understand where you're going, but if that's the philosophy, then you should just like feed all my kids for free, because who knows, they could.
Wait a minute, you're supposed to be on my side on every issue.
No, of this small set, the only group that I have an issue with are the folks that I mentioned earlier who are moderately mentally ill,
actually,
but
you know,
not designated as mentally ill and exempt.
When I talked about this on the air, the strongest supporters were African American working people who said, you know what, I have to go and get a job, and they resent the people who are sucking off the system. What is it that you don't get this week? Let's go around the table. Michael Holt, you're first.
Well, this is for Michelle. What I don't get is why the media pundits and religious hypocrites can criticize former football player Tim Tebow for being a good Christian. His crime, following the biblical mandate against sex before marriage.
Michelle Litjens.
Charlie, what I don't get is why the national media followed our president and didn't come out and call it terrorism.
Lynne DeBruin.
Well, just like you, I don't get how a couple with a perfectly clean record, no mental health issues, and limited ties to terrorist organizations could abandon their 6-month-old baby, put on body armor, and go on a shooting rampage.
Collin Roth.
What I don't get is who thought mocking prayers and goodwill during a tragedy was a smart and savvy political strategy to win a policy argument.
Well, we now know that the couple who murdered 14 people in California were inspired by the Islamic State, pledged allegiance to the leader of ISIS, and had been in touch with Islamic extremists. So why won't President Obama acknowledge that this was an act of Islamic terrorism? Or can't he bring himself to use that term? Next on Sunday Inside, our panel picks the winners and losers of the week. But first, here's your morning news update. It's time for our panel to pick the winners and losers of the week. Michael Holt, you're first.
The loser, county executive candidate Chris Larson, who showed up at the courthouse Thursday with petitions declaring that the Black academic achievement gap is acceptable to so-called liberals. Winner, area police and sheriff's deputies who spent yesterday mentoring Milwaukee youngsters as part of the Shopping with Cops project. Now, that's true and lasting community relations.
Michelle Litjens.
My losers this week are the narcissistic heathens who criticize people for praying for the victims of the shooting Wednesday. And we continue to thank and pray for my winners, the police, fire, and first responders who, like all of the men and women in public safety, put the lives of others in front of their own.
Lynne DeBruin.
Well, my winners are Defense Secretary Ash Carter and President Obama for Thursday's historic decision to open all military combat positions to women. This opens up 220,000 previously male-only positions to equally qualified women. Right. My loser is the Republican Party. The latest poll has Donald Trump as at his biggest lead so far. All other hopefuls are at least 20 points behind. Donald Trump is a racist, reactionary narcissist who thinks it's moral and possible to deport 11 million people, and reacted to San Bernardino by saying the U.S. should kill civilians, which is a war crime. Donald Trump isn't the face of a new Republican Party. He's the face of a much older and scarier one.
Collin Roth.
Well, on that note, my winner this week is actually Donald Trump, because, listen, I'm no fan, but the news cycle continues to play to his message, and his support is very, very real. It's long past time for many of us to take him seriously. My loser this week is President Obama. He said ISIS was contained right before the Paris attacks and told the country there was no credible threat from ISIS just before this California shooting. Stop denying reality and take this threat seriously.
Well, my loser is Fran Schmitz, the former John Doe special prosecutor. You're fired. Every time you open your mouth, you expose how unhinged an obsession your witch hunt of Wisconsin conservatives had become. Winner, I agree. First responders in California who may have prevented a second terrorist attack when they tracked down the husband and wife terrorists. Too often we forget how much we rely on their skill and their courage to keep us safe. Thanks for joining us and joining for my radio show Monday morning on News Radio 620 WTMJ from 8:30 until noon. Have a great week.